This theme, overcoming legacies and reimagining justice, what a fantastic theme. Because when I think about the death penalty today and when I think about death penalty abolition, it is about overcoming legacies. We don't start on a blank slate. If we started on a blank slate, we would not have the death penalty. We are here because we have to overcome these legacies of racism, legacies of wrongful convictions and actual innocence on death row. And so we heard from Anthony Graves, we have Carrie Max Cook here, Robert Robertson, Leslie Miller's father. And then in January here in Texas, Texas issued a posthumous exoneration of Tommy Lee Walker from a 1953 rape and murder. Black man convicted and sentenced to death by an all-white jury. So there's legacies of wrongful convictions, legacies of false claims about the death penalty. We know it doesn't deter. We know it doesn't cost less. We know it doesn't help victims. But yet we're here fighting with the ground slanted, trying to get those stories out. Legacies of geographical arbitrariness. And so I'm so glad that you talked. And here we are in Harris County. Who can't mention Johnny Holmes, who, by the way, averaged between 1992 and 2000. His office, led by him, averaged 12 death sentences per year. And talk about reimagining justice. Here we are in 2026. In 2025, the state of Texas had 3 new death sentences, 2 of which were in Harris County. Okay, so there's that. But my goodness, to think about a reimagining justice. And I come to you, I hail from Virginia. We abolished the death penalty in 2021. I want you to know, yeah. I do want you to know we're surviving just fine. Everything's fine. The water's nice and warm. Feel free to come on in. But when I think about Virginia had a very special relationship with the death penalty. And I know Texas is or was the capital of capital punishment, but I just need to say for a moment to talk to you about Virginia. Virginia had the very first execution in 1608. So, the Jamestown settlement was 1607, and it's like 1608, here we go. Virginia was responsible for 85% of the executions of all enslaved people. So Virginia's enslavement population was approximately 50%. It's just under 50%. And you can imagine how important the death penalty was as a tool of racial control with a population that had already lost its freedom, was already forced to work, was already subject to brutality. Their lives were really the only thing, one of the few things that they had left. And Virginia used the death penalty relentlessly and has this deep legacy of the death penalty used as a tool of racial control. When we abolished the death penalty in 2021, we were second in the most executing state, second only to Texas. And I'm sorry to say this, but per capita, we actually had more than you all, because everything's bigger in Texas. But we had the broadest death penalty statute. I say this not boastfully. I say this just by way of saying how amazing it is that we don't have a death penalty. We had the broadest death penalty statute, so we copied Texas, future dangerousness. But then we also had the other wide open, death that was in some particularly atrocious manner, as though all murders are atrocious. We had the fastest death penalty. We moved the very fastest from death sentence to execution. we had the highest turnover rate by way of appeals. In other words, the lowest success rate for appeals. And so if you look at a scatter graph, all of these states and Virginia's like way over in the corner. So Virginia, I always say Virginia's for lovers, and Virginia loved its death penalty. And, yet we were the first Southern state to abolish the death penalty, and Virginia was, Richmond, Virginia was the capital of the Confederacy. So, there's all of that. How do we do it? Well, I have to tell you, part of that is what was talked about in the first plenary panel. Anthony Graves was talking about what happens when you don't disaggregate services. And the story of Virginia's abolition really was that in 2003 and 2004, our General Assembly decided it would be cheaper. They could save millions and protect death sentences. They literally said that in the legislative history if they went ahead and put capital defense under the public defender's office. And so that's what they did. They started 4 regional capital defender offices. They started taking cases in 2004. And by the time we abolished in 2021, Virginia did not have a new death sentence in 10 years. Well, we only had 2 people left on death row. And at that point, state legislators were saying, the death penalty's dead on the vine. We're just paying millions for it. Fine, let's go ahead and get rid of it. And one of the things that we saw was that the more common the death penalty is, the more common it becomes, right? And so you've got Johnny Holmes who was going for death, and it just seemed normal and natural for juries to give death. But the saying is also true. The more uncommon the death penalty becomes, the more uncommon it will become. And at some point, we certainly saw this in Virginia, there's a tipping point where jurors it's so uncommon, and the attorneys are so good at telling the stories of who these people actually are, which takes a team. Takes a team of attorneys and mitigation specialists, investigators, coordinators. But, we became so good at it that juries just weren't ready to give it anymore. And so when I look at Texas, I look at it with hope, with great hope. And I actually did a series of extensive interviews with one of the chief capital defenders, and he was talking about how they won a trial, how they were not getting death. And one of the things he said was the unsung hero were the community organizers. And he said, listen, we were seeing the jury pool softening. The prosecutors didn't see it, but we did. We saw it. And he said this was the grassroots information campaigns that, have been going on for 20, 30 years. And so sometimes it's like, what difference, how can I, what difference are we making? And I just want to say, it's such a big difference. And I think you're starting to see the fruit of that. So kudos to Texas. So many legacies. But I'd like to spend a moment, the remaining time that I have, to talk about the legacy of false information about executions by lethal injection. And somehow this seems fitting to me because the very first execution by lethal injection was Texas in 1982. So I first want to acknowledge, as I try to in my talks, that talking about how we kill may be counterintuitive for a group that doesn't think we should be killing at all. But it's sneaky that way. And I've come to see that lethal injection is playing an incredibly important role in maintaining this death penalty today. And so I think it's important that we talk about this. And yes, I just published a book on it. So there's that. So I'll start there and just say I'm a death penalty researcher. That's what I do. I have a point of view. I'm here, so you can guess what it is. But I do have a point of view about the death penalty. But my contribution to the movement is to try to be just the facts man, to be the trusted researcher, but to show, hey, the facts also they're terrible. And so I asked questions, and this book started with a research question, which was, why are states so absolutely terrible at executions by lethal injection? Why we know how to put down our beloved pets. And forgive the clinical nature of that. But, why am I seeing 3-hour long executions? Why am I seeing autopsies with 18 puncture wounds? Why am I seeing people waking up on the gurney and trying to get up off the gurney? All of those things happened. And so I started to research it. It became clear about a year in that it was a book, and I did not want to write a book. I can't even tell you how strongly I did not want to write a book. So I actually set this project down. I was ready to walk away from a year's worth of research, which doesn't really happen in my field, but I was like, no. But I went to this conference and people kept asking me, what are you working on? And it was very stressful because I just spent a year on something that I was walking away from. And now I'm just going to get pretty personal for a moment and tell you I am a person of faith. And I'm not, what I will share with you, is not to push my faith on anyone else. It's just to explain to you how I came to this space. But I, at one point, was pretty stressed out. And so I went back up to my hotel room and I got on my knees and was like, Lord, actually, my first words were, I know you can hear me. But after that, I said, I don't want to write a book. And I don't want to write a book on lethal injection. And I talked about all the ways that this would be bad for me. And I said, but if this is what if I thought this is what you're calling me to, none of that would matter. None of it. But if it is what you're calling me to, then speak super clearly. Because I don't want to do this. And I'm kneeling against my bed in this hotel room in San Diego. And I just reached over, because I'm right on the bed. I reached over to see, I pulled open the drawer in the little side table to see if there was a Gideon's Bible in there. I didn't have a Bible with me. And there was. And I just flipped it open. And I will tell you, I have the picture on my phone, but I'm going to read it to you. Top left. Psalm 45, my heart is overflowing with a good theme. I recite my composition concerning the king. My tongue is the pen of a ready writer. I literally said, I guess I'm going to write a book on lethal injection. And so I did. And it took 5 years. I wrote through cancer in 2019. I wrote through COVID, who put everyone smack in my house in 2020. And, 2022, I had a draft. And nobody wanted it. Nobody wanted it. And through an entire year, I heard no, 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 no. And finally, December 7th, so literally a whole year, the last no's came in. And so I packed up my stuff and went home and cried like a grown-up. And was back on my knees and said, Lord, I don't understand. I did it, and I'm so happy I did it. And did I not do it well enough? What was this even about? Was this about my faithfulness? Was this about obedience? I don't even understand. This doesn't make any sense. But I need to know you are there. I need to know you're still there. And so I flipped open my Bible again. And this time, I have a picture of this too, with my couch that I was crying against behind it. But this time it opened to Habakkuk 2:3. I literally said, what the is Habakkuk? It did rhyme with that. But this is top left. And the Lord answered me and said, write the vision and make it plain upon tables so that he may run that read it. I think that's you. For the vision awaits its appointed time, but at the end it shall speak and not lie. Though it tarry, wait for it will surely come. And so at that point, I was like, okay, I don't know how it's going to happen, but it is going to happen. And then it did happen. I was in Puerto Rico giving a talk and ran across NYU Press and met my editor, and the rest, I guess, is history. But, I want you to know I wrote it in part to change hearts and minds. And so I wrote it for the public. I could have had a regular academic press, and that's not what I wanted. So, I went on this book tour, as you say, 23 states, and I was so heartened by that. I was so encouraged. So many people, they just don't know. They just don't know. And what the book has been is an opportunity to talk about the death penalty more largely. And so it's just been this beautiful opportunity. Okay, so I know I've got like 10 more minutes. And so I want to now talk to you a little bit about the book and what I found. I mean, I could be up here for hours. I know I can't, but I'm just saying there's so much there. But the point of this book, Secrets of the Killing State, is really correcting a legacy of misinformation. And so and Texas is all over this thing. And so I thought I would take a couple moments to talk to you about, I mean, this isn't even all of Texas, but, I'm going to give you a couple little pieces that I've picked up that I want to share. One is I thought there was science behind this thing. Like, surely someone didn't just make this up off the top of their head. Someone literally made it up off the top of his head. That's a whole separate story. That's Oklahoma. You got to go to Oklahoma for that. But I think what's important is that at the time that lethal injection was introduced, it was 1977, and a federal court had found a First Amendment right to televise executions. Now, it wouldn't last, but nobody could have known that. And so you have legislators saying, oh, we got to do something different here. And so, for example, the sponsor of Texas's lethal injection bill introduced the bill, and here was his comment. He said, we've got to do something different. People will be repulsed by the idea of an electrocution taking place in their living room. So he's like, we can't have that. Another sponsor of the legislation, this is the Texas prison chaplain at the time, quote, I would like to see this carried out in a nice clean room, something that doesn't look like a prison. Certainly not a death cell. I can conceive of how this could be handled in such a way that it would be considered gentle and humane if done with care. So this, the story is bigger than that, but this was really not about a humane execution. This was about a humane looking execution from the very start. I thought, here's another misconception. I thought doctors were doing this. Doctors are not doing this. The people actually pushing the syringes are non-medical prison guards, and they're doing it from another room. And you might say, like, well, how well trained are they? Back to Texas. So in 2022, Texas conducted an execution and didn't have any media there. The media were there, but they weren't let in. And Texas officials immediately said, oh, that was a mistake. We're going to look into, we're going to do an investigation. So they investigated, said, it's all fine. It was just a one-off. The ACLU said, I don't think so. We would like the records of those investigations. They litigated it for a while. They finally got those records in 2022. And they reveal, and this is the ACLU, a department woefully unprepared to carry out an execution due to confusion and lack of training. And so they ended up getting all of these internal emails. One of the emails, for example, summarized an interview with a Texas executioner. And I quote, the document read, and I quote, to one executioner's knowledge, there are no written guidelines or protocols about the execution itself. He's aware of a document entitled Execution Procedure, but he stated he had not read it. So there's that. Okay, let me give you the next one. Texas was using expired drugs, so it was using compounded drugs. And Texas defenders did a great job of, trying to get the information because they suspected they were using expired drugs. They couldn't get that information. They were stonewalled. But then they started looking at shipments. And so they end up documenting that the state of Texas was using drugs that one set more than 630 days old. And just so you know, they expire in 45 days. One is more than 630 days old. The other vials were more than 1,300 days old. They sued. They actually won at trial. The trial court said, oh, yeah, you're violating these 4 laws. Goes up to the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, and they said, yeah, but you can't issue a stay of execution. And so Texas simply executed the plaintiffs one by one. So much for that suit. Let's see. I've got one more, and then I'm going to turn to my next point. I had a whole bunch, but I think we're going to run out of time before that. So the other one I thought you might be interested in was that Texas was caught falsifying a prescription. So they listed the warden as the patient. That's not funny. But, they listed the warden as the patient and the address as the Huntsville Unit Hospital, which had been closed since 1983. So CNN reported this and said, a federal civil complaint in Texas claims the defendants may have falsified prescription, lied to pharmacies, and perhaps even broken the law, but they're not drug runners. CNN noted they're officials from the Texas Department of Criminal Justice responsible for executing death row inmates. Okay. So I could go on and on, but what I want to say in part about this is, people say about the death penalty, well, they deserved it. And one of my responses is one question. Now, I'm going to disagree on that, but, one question is whether someone deserves death for what they did. That's only half of the equation. The other half of the equation is, has the state done what it needs to do to deserve to take that life? And my book is all about all the ways that that is not true. And so one of the questions I have, and I'll try to close up very shortly here, is why are states sticking with lethal injection? Why is Texas sticking with it? They can't get the drugs. By the way, I also documented them smuggling drugs across the border, but that's a whole nother story. But they can't get the drugs. They can't get qualified medical professionals. They can't get access to the veins. These folks, generally have histories of poor health, some IV drug use, so they have notoriously weak veins. They're spending millions of dollars. They're breaking state and federal laws. Why are they doing it? It's not even humane. Why? And what I come to see is that lethal injection just does one thing well, just one. And that is it hides the violence of state killing. And I wish I'd put it in the book, but, a doctor once said, the heart stops reluctantly. And what he was explaining is before the body is ready to give up life on its own, it takes physical force to make the heart stop beating. It could be a car accident. It could be a homicide. It could be an execution. But it takes force, physical force, violence, for the heart to stop beating before it's ready to stop beating on its own. And what is special about lethal injection is it hides that violence. It internalizes it under a chemical veil. And so with lethal injection, we don't see the blood that you would with the firing squad. We don't have to smell the sickly smell of burning flesh like you do with the electric chair. We don't have to see people gasping and retching like with the gas chamber. We get to tell ourselves that these people are just falling into forever sleep. And I think that has played an incredibly important role in us not thinking about the death penalty at all. Nothing to see here, move along. Out of sight, out of mind. And so, my contribution here is just I think to get rid of the death penalty, we have to be talking about it. And this lethal injection thing, which was devised so that we're not thinking about it and not talking about it, I want to use that as the opportunity to talk about it and to talk about the issues more broadly. I think I have 1 minute left. And so with that moment, I just want to say one of the things that I learned that I wasn't studying is what I talk about in the epilogue, which is, for so many of these people, I mean, studying lethal injection is studying executions. And studying executions gave me a front row seat as to who these people are at the end. Not who they were at the time of their terrible crime, but who are they, at the end, and they're not the same person. And so I write in this epilogue, um, in our mind's eye, we tend to freeze people in a single moment in time. I myself have done so. But time works changes, and studying executions has been a potent reminder that humans have the greatest capacity to change of all. At this very moment in time, dozens and dozens of prisoners are scheduled to die at the hands of the state, each with a story, most with regret, but all more than they are in their worst moment. So I thank you for having me. I thank you for, reimagining justice. And, I just think of the saying, your mercies are new each day. And as long as we're breathing, we can make change. They can make change, and we can make change and change hearts and minds. And so I just commend you all for giving your Saturday to thinking about this important topic.